In the heart of the Nile Valley, more than 5,000 years ago, one man rose above warring tribes in endless bloodshed and carved his name into the stone of eternity. This is not just the story of a king, it's the story of the very first pharaoh, the man who united Upper and Lower Egypt and gave birth to one of the greatest civilizations in human history. Welcome to Mystic Ancient. The story of Narmer, Menez. Narmer, often remembered by another name, Menez, is believed to be the legendary founder of the First Dynasty of Egypt around 3100 BC. Before him, Egypt was divided, the fertile Lower Egypt of the Nile Delta in the north and the desert lands of Upper Egypt in the south. Both regions had their own kings, crowns, and gods. The land was rich, but fractured. Narmer's genius was not just in battle, but in vision. He understood that Egypt could never become powerful while split in two. And so he led his armies northward, uniting the two lands under his rule. The most famous relic of his achievement is the Narmer Palette, an ancient ceremonial stone tablet. On one side, Narmer is shown wearing the white crown of Upper Egypt, striking down an enemy. On the other side, he wears the red crown of Lower Egypt, symbolizing that he now ruled both lands. This was no mere battle trophy. It was the birth certificate of a new nation, a unified Egypt. Narmer also founded the city of Memphis, near the junction of Upper and Lower Egypt. This would become one of the greatest capitals in Egyptian history, strategically placed at the heart of the kingdom. But Narmer's story is not without blood. Ancient tales hint that his unification was not peaceful. Legends claim he married Neithotep, a princess from the north, to cement his rule, but only after crushing resistance with brutal force. As with many ancient rulers, his death is cloaked in mystery. Some accounts whisper that Narmer may have been killed by a hippopotamus, a symbolic beast of chaos in Egyptian mythology. Whether true or myth, his end only strengthened his legend. Narmer's legacy was not just the unification of Egypt. He gave birth to the pharaonic system, the idea that a king was not just a man, but a living god, chosen by the gods to rule on earth. Every pharaoh that came after would walk in his shadow. So here begins the grand saga of Egypt's pharaohs. From a divided land of rival kings, Narmer forged a kingdom that would last for 3,000 years. But what happened after his reign? Who picked up the crown of the two lands? A young kingdom, freshly born from the fires of unification, now stands at the edge of history. The crown of the two lands has passed from the hands of its founder, Narmer, into those of his son. But peace was never guaranteed, and Egypt's destiny rested on the shoulders of a ruler who would prove that Narmer's dream was not just a moment, but the beginning of an empire. This is the story of Hor-Aha. The story of Hor-Aha. Hor-Aha, whose name means Horus the Fighter, was the second king of Egypt's first dynasty, and most likely the son of Narmer and Queen Neithotep. If Narmer was the unifier, then Hor-Aha was the builder and stabilizer of the new kingdom. After his father's brutal campaigns, Egypt was united, but fragile. Rival tribes still remembered their independence, and the threat of rebellion hung heavy in the air. Hor-Aha's mission was to secure Narmer's vision. One of his greatest achievements was the formal founding of Memphis, the city Narmer had begun to establish. Situated at the very point where Upper and Lower Egypt met, Memphis became the beating heart of Egypt's politics, religion, and trade for centuries. Hor-Aha strengthened its foundations, building palaces, temples, and administrative centers, making it the true capital of the two lands. Hor-Aha was also deeply tied to religion. He is credited with dedicating temples to Neith, the war goddess of size, and to Bastet, the lioness goddess. This was not just piety, it was politics. By honoring deities from both Upper and Lower Egypt, Hor-Aha cemented unity between the two regions through shared worship. But Hor-Aha's reign was not without blood. Ancient records suggest he fought campaigns in Nubia to the south, securing control of the Nile and its trade routes. These wars not only protected Egypt, but also brought wealth and resources into his young kingdom. Some historians even believe Hor-Aha may have been the true identity of Menez, the legendary founder, rather than Narmer. If that's true, it means Hor-Aha himself might have been remembered as the first great king. But whether he was Narmer's son continuing the dream, or the legendary Menez himself, one thing is clear. Hor-Aha built the foundations of Egypt's monarchy that would endure for millennia. As for his death, Egyptian tradition, ever dramatic, claims he was killed by a hippopotamus, just like the tales surrounding Narmer. To the Egyptians, the hippo was a symbol of chaos, and perhaps this legend symbolized that even the greatest kings could fall prey to the eternal struggle between order and disorder. From the shadow of his father, Hor-Aha stepped forward as the true architect of a stable, unified Egypt. He built cities, honored the gods, and secured the Nile against rebellion. But the story does not end here, for Egypt's throne was destined to pass again, and a new name would rise to carve its mark into history. The Nile flows eternal, carrying with it the stories of kings whose names have been etched into time. After Narmer the unifier, after Hor-Aha the builder, came a ruler whose reign stretched long and left echoes in both blood and stone. A king remembered for conquest, for devotion to the gods, and for mysteries buried deep within his tomb. This is the story of Pharaoh Djer. The story of Djer. Djer was the third king of Egypt's first dynasty, ruling around 3050 BC. He inherited a young but ambitious kingdom, and his reign would become one of the longest of his age, nearly 40 years on the throne. Where his predecessors had focused on unification and foundations, Djer expanded Egypt's power and influence. Ancient records describe military campaigns into the Sinai Peninsula and possibly even into Palestine. These expeditions were not just about territory. They secured precious resources like turquoise, copper, and trade routes that linked Egypt with the wider ancient world. Djer's reign is also deeply tied to religion and burial practices. His tomb at Abydos, one of the most sacred burial grounds in Egypt, is vast and mysterious. It contained dozens of subsidiary burials, thought to be the graves of servants, courtiers, and even family members who may have been sacrificed to accompany him into the afterlife. This practice, grim and haunting, shows how early Egyptians believed in the king's divine nature. When the pharaoh journeyed into the next world, he did not go alone. Archaeologists have found ivory tablets and artifacts from his reign, some of the oldest surviving inscriptions of Egyptian hieroglyphs. These records give us glimpses into early administration, temple offerings, and the rituals that bound the kingdom together. Legends later grew around Djer. Ancient sources sometimes confused him with Osiris, the god of the dead, suggesting that Djer's memory became entwined with the mythology of divine kingship and resurrection. In other words, he wasn't just remembered as a man, but as a god reborn. As for the end of his life, the details remain shrouded in the sands of time. Whether he died peacefully or met a violent fate, his burial at Abydos ensured that Djer's name would be spoken for millennia. His reign stands as a testament to the early pharaohs' belief that kings were not merely rulers of men, but living gods who commanded both life and death. Djer's reign stretched long and deep, pushing Egypt's reach beyond its borders and shaping the rituals of kingship for centuries to come. But after his death, the crown of the two lands passed once again to a ruler whose story, though less remembered, still carries the whispers of Egypt's dawn. From Narmer's unification, to Hor-Aha's foundation, to Djer's long reign of conquest and faith, the story of Egypt's first dynasty marches forward. Now a new pharaoh rises, a ruler whose reign is carved not in pyramids, but in symbols of power, art, and eternal remembrance. His name still lingers in stone and in legend. This is the story of Pharaoh Djet. Djet, also known as Waj, was the fourth king of Egypt's first dynasty, ruling around 2980 BC. His name means serpent, and his reign, though shorter than that of his father Djer, left behind powerful traces in Egypt's early history. Djet inherited a strong and stable Egypt, already unified and expanding. Unlike Narmer and Hor-Aha, he did not need to fight for unity, nor did he campaign as fiercely as Djer. Instead, his reign seems to have focused on consolidation, administration, and religion. One of the most remarkable artifacts of his rule is his serpent-shaped serek, royal emblem, carved on monuments and objects. This was the first time the cobra, later the uraeus, symbol of divine kingship, appeared as a royal mark, foreshadowing the pharaohs who would come after him. Djet's tomb at Abydos, known as Tomb Z, is another piece of his legacy. Though smaller than his father's, it was richly furnished. Among the treasures discovered was the famous Djer comb, carved from ivory, showing one of the earliest depictions of a pharaoh wearing the double crown of Upper and Lower Egypt. This image symbolized the continuity of Narmer's unification and the eternal role of the pharaoh as lord of the two lands. Like his predecessors, Djer may have had retainers buried alongside him, a chilling practice in which servants and companions were interred to serve their king in the afterlife. This ritual reflects just how divine the pharaohs were considered. Their presence extended beyond death itself. His queen was likely Merneith, a powerful woman who would soon play a dramatic role in Egypt's story. Evidence suggests she may have acted as regent after Djer's death, ruling on behalf of their young son. Djer's reign ended earlier than expected. While the cause of his death is unknown, his memory endured. His name, tied to the serpent, became a symbol of royal authority, protection, and eternal life. Though his reign was short, Djer's legacy slithered into eternity. His serpent name, his crown carved in ivory, his tomb at Abydos, all spoke of a king who ruled in the shadow of giants, yet left his own eternal mark. But Egypt's story was about to take an extraordinary turn. After Djer's death, a woman stepped into power, a queen who may have ruled Egypt as regent or even as pharaoh in her own right. In the golden dawn of Egypt's history, kings wore crowns of conquest and carried the weight of gods. But after the serpent king Djer fell, the throne of the two lands stood vulnerable. Into this silence stepped not a warrior king, but a woman, a queen whose name still whispers through stone and shadow. She may have been the first woman to rule Egypt, long before Hatshepsut and Cleopatra. This is the story of Queen Merneith. The story of Queen Merneith. Merneith lived around 2950 BC during the First Dynasty of Egypt. She was the wife of King Djer and the mother of the next pharaoh, Din. When Djer died unexpectedly, their son Din was too young to rule. At this fragile moment, Merneith stepped forward, not just as a queen, but as a ruler. Her name, Merneith, means beloved of Neith, the goddess of war and hunting. This devotion was no accident. By tying herself to a powerful goddess, Merneith projected an image of authority and divine backing, essential for a woman leading a kingdom in a world dominated by kings. Evidence for her reign is scattered but striking. At Abydos, she was given a royal tomb, Tomb Y, alongside the pharaohs of the First Dynasty. This was no ordinary burial. Her tomb was vast, surrounded by dozens of subsidiary graves for servants, the same treatment given to kings. On a seal impression, her name appears in a serek, the royal frame usually reserved for pharaohs. This suggests that Merneith may not have been just a regent, but perhaps ruled as pharaoh herself for a time. If true, she would be the first female ruler in Egyptian history. Her reign was a time of guardianship, ensuring that Egypt did not collapse into chaos after Djer's death. By maintaining order until her son Din was old enough, she protected Narmer's dream of a united Egypt. When she died, Merneith was honored as a king would be, a rare privilege. Her name was remembered among the royal line, not merely as a queen, but as a ruler of the two lands. Merneith, queen, regent, and perhaps Egypt's first female pharaoh. Her story set the stage for women like Sobekneferu, Hatshepsut, and Cleopatra, who would one day seize the throne in their own right. But after her guardianship, the crown passed to her son, a boy who would grow into one of the most powerful rulers of the First Dynasty. From the shadow of a queen regent, a boy king rises. His mother, Merneith, had safeguarded the throne through fragile years, but now the crown of the two lands rested firmly on his head. He would not only rule, he would redefine what it meant to be pharaoh. Warriors, wealth, and the very image of kingship itself, all were transformed under his reign. This is the story of Din, the fifth king of Egypt's First Dynasty. The story of King Din, often called Udimu, ascended the throne around 2970 BC as the fifth ruler of Egypt's First Dynasty. He was the son of Djer and Merneith, and thanks to his mother's regency, he inherited a kingdom already stable and united. But Din was no passive heir. He would prove to be one of the most notable and innovative kings of early Egypt. Din's reign is remarkable for its length and prosperity. He ruled for several decades, long enough to push Egypt into a golden age of administration, culture, and military strength. The warrior King Din is remembered as the first pharaoh to be depicted wearing the double crown, the red crown of Lower Egypt and the white crown of Upper Egypt, symbolizing his dominion over both lands. On an ivory label from his tomb, he is shown striking down an Asiatic enemy with a mace. This is one of the earliest known images of the pharaoh as a warrior, a theme that would echo across Egyptian art for millennia. This wasn't just propaganda. Din likely led campaigns into Sinai and possibly against Libyan tribes, securing trade routes and Egypt's borders. The innovator Din introduced the use of the title King of Upper and Lower Egypt, formalizing the concept of dual rulership. He also established many aspects of the royal court, officials, titles, and ceremonies that would become standard in later dynasties. Under his reign, Egypt's administration grew more sophisticated. Seals and labels show detailed records of taxation, offerings to temples, and state organization. Din was building not just a kingdom of warriors, but a kingdom of order and law. The tomb at Abydos. Din's tomb at Abydos is one of the grandest of the First Dynasty. For the first time, a tomb had a staircase descending into it, a revolutionary design that would inspire later royal tombs. His burial chamber was richly furnished, with ivory carvings, seals, and goods meant to serve him in the afterlife. Like its predecessors, Din's tomb included the burials of retainers, people sacrificed to accompany him beyond death. To his people, this was not cruelty, but divine order. The king must rule in eternity as on earth. Legacy Din's reign became legendary in Egypt's memory. Later kings looked back at him as a model of kingship, a warrior, a statesman, and a divine ruler. By combining the power of conquest with the power of organization, Din secured the foundations of pharaonic Egypt for centuries to come. Din, the warrior, the innovator, the true master of the two lands. He was not just a king who ruled, but a king who defined what rulership meant. After him, the dynasty continued, but could anyone live up to the legacy he left behind? After the long and glorious reign of Din, Egypt stood tall, confident, and strong. But history has a way of testing every ruler, and the crown now passed to a man whose time on the throne was marked not by triumph, but by struggle. His reign shows us the fragile balance of power in Egypt's earliest days. This is the story of Pharaoh Enidjib, the sixth king of the First Dynasty. The story of King Enidjib. Enidjib, also known as Ajib or Merpibia, rose to power around 2930 BC as the sixth ruler of the First Dynasty. He inherited the throne after the mighty reign of Din, but unlike his predecessor, Enidjib's time as pharaoh was marked by conflict and instability. The struggles of a pharaoh. Enidjib inherited a system of government that Din had strengthened, titles, administration, and rituals that reinforced the pharaoh's divine role. Yet, for all the appearance of power, Enidjib seems to have faced internal unrest. Several inscriptions from his reign tell of revolts and uprisings, suggesting that his authority was challenged, perhaps by powerful nobles or rival factions. Where Din had ruled in strength, Enidjib seemed to rule in the shadow of doubt. The First Sed Festival. One of the most curious details of Enidjib's reign is his association with the Sed Festival, a great jubilee meant to renew a pharaoh's strength after 30 years on the throne. But here's the mystery. Enidjib never ruled for 30 years. Some scholars believe he falsely claimed the Sed Festival to strengthen his image and legitimize his authority. If true, this would be one of the earliest examples of political propaganda in Egyptian history, a king using ritual and symbols to project power he did not fully possess. The tomb at Abydos. Enidjib was buried at Abydos in a tomb known as Tomb X. Compared to Din's grand resting place, Enidjib's tomb is smaller and less impressive, reflecting perhaps the weaker stability of his reign. Still, it contained offerings and artifacts, showing that despite his troubles, he was remembered as a pharaoh. Legacy. Unlike Narmer the unifier, Hor-Aha the founder, Djer the conqueror, or Din the innovator, Enidjib's reign is remembered for its struggles and uncertainties. Yet his story reminds us that even in Egypt's golden age of beginnings, the throne was never unshakable. Pharaohs were gods on earth, but they were also men, vulnerable to the currents of politics and rebellion. Enidjib's reign reveals the cracks in the foundations of power. He ruled in the shadow of Din, and though he wore the double crown, his grip on Egypt was far less secure. But history does not stop for weakness. After Anajib's death, the throne passed once more to another king who would try to restore strength to the dynasty. In the silent deserts of Abydos lies the story of a pharaoh whose reign was written in shadows. He came to the throne after years of unrest, but instead of glory, his rule was remembered by the ancients as a time of chaos. Who was this mysterious king? And why did his name echo with misfortune? This is the story of Pharaoh Semerkhet, the seventh ruler of Egypt's first dynasty. The story of King Semerkhet. Semerkhet, ruling around 2920 BC, was the seventh pharaoh of the first dynasty. His name means companion of the divine community, but despite its sacred meaning, ancient records describe his reign as one of disaster and turmoil. The turbulent reign. Unlike Den, the mighty king, or even Anajib, who struggled to hold power, Semerkhet's time on the throne is remembered in later king lists as a time of calamity. Ancient Egyptian chroniclers, writing centuries later, described his reign with words of sorrow, calling it a period when many disasters befell Egypt. The exact nature of these disasters is lost to history. Some historians believe it may have been plague, famine, or civil strife. Others suggest that his succession to the throne may not have been entirely legitimate, and that Egypt was divided by internal struggles. Royal power and control. Despite the ominous descriptions, evidence shows that Semerkhet still exercised pharaonic authority. Ivory tablets and seals from his reign record offerings, temple activities, and royal decrees. He ruled for about 9 years, long enough to leave an imprint on Egypt's history, though one marred by uncertainty. The tomb at Abydos. Semerkhet's tomb at Abydos, Tomb U, is unusual. It is large and carefully constructed, yet there are signs that its building was rushed or altered during his reign. The tomb contained hundreds of subsidiary burials, where servants were sacrificed to serve him in the afterlife, a grim reminder of the divine power pharaohs held over life and death. Curiously, Semerkhet's name appears scratched out or missing in some later records, suggesting that his memory may have been erased or cursed. Was he a usurper? Was his reign so disastrous that later Egyptians wanted to forget him? The truth remains hidden beneath the sands. Semerkhet's legacy is one of mystery. To later Egyptians, he was a cautionary figure, a king whose rule symbolized misfortune. Yet, even in chaos, the institution of kingship endured. His reign reminds us that even in Egypt's earliest days, pharaohs were not invincible gods, but rulers who faced the trials of fate. Semerkhet, the cursed king, remembered not for victories or monuments, but for disaster. His story shows us the fragile line between divine power and human vulnerability. But Egypt did not end with him. The crown of the two lands passed again to the last king of the first dynasty, a ruler who would close this opening chapter of pharaonic history. As the storm of Semerkhet's troubled reign faded, Egypt looked once more to its king for stability. Rising to the throne was a ruler who would bring calm after chaos, and whose long reign closed the first great chapter in Egyptian history. His name was Ka, the last pharaoh of the first dynasty, and his story marks both an ending and the beginning of what was to come. The story of King Ka. Pharaoh Ka, also known as Ka or Kebet, ruled around 2910 BC as the eighth and final king of the first dynasty. His name means his arm is raised, a fitting symbol of strength and renewal after the disasters of his predecessor, Semerkhet. A return to stability. Ka's reign is remembered as a time of recovery and peace. After years of unrest, he restored order across the two lands. Archaeological evidence, seal impressions, ivory labels, and inscriptions suggest he re-established control over temples, trade routes, and administration. Unlike Semerkhet's chaotic rule, Ka seems to have enjoyed a long reign, perhaps 26 years or more, making him one of the longest ruling pharaohs of the early period. This stability allowed Egypt to breathe, regroup, and prepare for its next dynastic age. The tomb at Abydos. Ka built one of the largest tombs at el-Kaab, Abydos, marking him as a pharaoh of significance. His burial chamber was expansive, with multiple subsidiary tombs, servants who were sacrificed to accompany him into the afterlife. The scale of his tomb suggests that Egypt was once again secure and wealthy, capable of honoring its king with grandeur. The dawn of the second dynasty. Ka's death, however, marked more than the end of his reign. It ended the entire First Dynasty. His passing triggered a shift in power. Some evidence suggests a brief struggle over succession, but ultimately, the throne passed to Hotep-Sekemwi, who began the Second Dynasty. Legacy Ka's reign is remembered as a time of renewal after disaster. He healed the scars left by Semerkhet, brought stability back to Egypt, and ensured that the divine kingship survived into a new age. His story reminds us that even in the earliest days, pharaohs were judged not only by conquest, but by their ability to preserve order, the sacred Mot. Ka closed the book of Egypt's First Dynasty, a ruler who steadied the land after chaos and passed the crown to a new line of kings. With his death, the First Dynasty came to an end, but Egypt's story was far from over.